Yeah.
Yes, right, Heather, I'm going.
Yes. That is correct.
You?
No.
No.
Apparently I won't ever,
Ever have to go again?
however. Like,
I'll never say that.
well, yeah, no, apparently in my current role there, the way it falls in the organization, they won't need me to go, but there's other people, who- yeah. I mean, I would Rachel. I had a great time.
I remember seeing it, I was like.
I was there, you went.
Wow, I'm way down here.
What's that?
Bill. No, oh, Adrian,
Adrian,
yeah,
a little bit after you guys were down.
oh, yeah,
Adrian especially, seemed pretty bad.
yeah. Yeah. A lot of that. The log of the make fun.
What's going on? I haven't read it. This one?
So,
Oh, here we go. So I think we're only missing Stephen.
Yes.
Okay, we'll wait for all of that. Take a seat and then I can start.
I'm surprised I have.
Yes,
anyway.
it was a rare time I wasn't like rushing to get here on time.
I
It was a moment time to spare.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Don't ask me how fast I'm going.
Right? I think that my daughter a little bit late and she knows when I'm rushing, she smells.
They all do, and then they slow you down.
Yeah.
Okay, guess we'll go ahead and get this meeting started at, 6:01.
don't forget your mic.
Start the meeting, it's 6:02 p.m. If we can have the roll call, please.
City of Woodland? Present. City of Davis? City of West Sacramento?
Present.
Yolo County?
Present.
Director at large?
Present.
Yes, four.
And Winters.
And Winters, yeah.
Okay, at this time, it is time to take comments for items that are not on the agenda, but within the purview of the Yolo Transit District. Comments are limited to 2 minutes per person. If you wish to address us on items that are not on this evening's agenda, please identify yourself and the community in which you live before providing comment. And is there anyone in the audience, live, who wishes to make comment? No? And do we have anybody online?
We do not have anyone on.
All right,
One quick question. So I know one of we had our UAC meeting last Thursday and one of my colleagues had mentioned that she tried to get into our last meeting on Zoom and had some issues. Her name is Carol Gavins. I just wanted to make sure that if there's anyone like trying to get in or.
So far, we haven't had anyone say they've had trouble. She may have called me earlier today.
Okay,
And she has the correct link. and
Okay.
it's working. So.
okay.
I would just remind Madam Clerk to use her microphone.
thank you very much. Seeing no public comments for items that are not on the agenda, we'll close that at 6:04. And we'll take up our first item of business, which is to appoint the chair and vice chair for calendar year 2024. And if anyone is interested, I would be interested in chairing again because I am very invested in the building out of the expansion with the equity component. So I'll just throw that out there for interest, and also actually, I also want to say really a deep amount of gratitude to my fellow members. I am always really mindful to make sure everyone is heard and the issues come forward, and you guys are really great to work with. So it's also my gratitude moment. That's it. Do we have any, do you want to take up vice chair first and then chair, or chair and vice chair? What's your pleasure?
I think vice chair, because I know Steve is the vice chair and with him, I don't know if we want to wait on that until he gets here or,
We might.
Yeah.
You want to take up chair then?
sure, yeah.
Okay. Entertaining motion from the floor for chair.
Well, I'd like to make that motion. For the Lisa Baker to be chair.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have discussion or anyone else who wants to throw their hat in the fancy ring? Okay, seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? You guys are all stuck with me. Thank you so
Done a
much.
great job. Thank you so much.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. We'll, if we don't mind,
Madam Chair, if you will permit me to make a comment, I just want to express on behalf of staff our gratitude for your dedication, all of the committee members, but Lisa, who, meets with us every time we before to provide input on the agenda, and has been a real cheerleader for the work to kind of add additional seats to the committee. And so for all of your dedication, it's not always a glamorous job. I just really want to appreciate both how well you do it, and how great you are to work with.
oh, thank you so much. Usually I'm just called stubborn. I totally appreciate that. Madam Chair, point of order, we'll just hold the vice chair elections until our current vice chair arrives. Yes. Okay, so with that, let's move on to consent calendar. Is there anybody who wants to remove anything from the consent calendar? I will direct you in particular to the meeting dates for the remainder of 2024. Just as a memory refresher, and I have to say that the director refreshed my memory, so I'll share. We had looked at the dates at the last meeting and we didn't hear anyone having any issues with those meeting dates, but said we would hold off on approving the balance until we knew who the incoming chair was. So if no one wants to remove anything from the agenda, you can move the entire consent agenda, or if you want to take it off for discussion, you can take one or both items off. But that's it.
I'd like to pull an item, and which is the meeting dates.
Okay, so pulling 4I off the consent calendar, we'll take that up after we finish consent. Is there anybody who wants to remove any other item or approve the balance of the consent agenda?
So moved.
I have a motion for consent. Do I have a second?
Second,
I have a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the minutes by consent for November 7th, 2023, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Let's move on to item 4A, meeting dates for the remainder of 2024. And since you've removed it, you have the floor, Roland.
sure. I think the Tuesday, October date should be the 29th instead of the 27th. I think it's just a typo.
The typo?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any other issues with the dates?
One thing I would just want to raise really quick is, given that I think it was unfortunate that the most recent cycle, our most recent meeting cycle, that the timeline for being able to weigh in on the Yolo 80 EIR, the board's vote on the preferred alternative, that we didn't get a chance to weigh in and advise them on that. So I'm just curious, looking at these dates, how these, I'd like to hear from staff how you think these will align with the forthcoming chances to weigh in on any potential recirculation of the EIR or that ultimate decision on obligating the funds.
Well, that's a great question. In terms of I'm not aware at this time of Caltrans planning to recirculate the EIR. So to my knowledge, they are aiming to certify the final EIR sometime in March. That is, I know what they're aiming towards, but I don't know, that's what I can tell you. So at this time, the way Caltrans does their EIR, so they do not, there may be a 10-day period for public comment. That they won't be holding any meetings. I don't really think that is a sufficient amount of time for the board, let alone this committee and then the board to meet and have any kind of conversation about that. So So I will just say, unless they do decide to recirculate the EIR, I don't really see another opportunity for this committee or the board to weigh in. As far as, when the decision will be, the decision to obligate the infra funds, I don't know exactly. I'm looking at Brian to see if he has a better sense.
No, I don't. So we haven't, we don't know which meeting will be returning to the board to obligate those funds because some of the process still needs to play out. And so then it's impossible for us to cross-reference that with the proposed schedule. We don't know when we're bringing it. But we do think it'll be sometime, the spring. But that's the best guess we have at this point.
I don't want to get too far into something that's actually only agendized under director's report. But I would say that the sort of broader point that Andrew brings up is to make sure that to the extent possible, we have enough lead time to provide the appropriate feedback to the board. So with that in mind, I think even though we approve these dates, there's nothing that precludes us from changing a date in the future to be able to do something that's time sensitive. So I would definitely make sure that we're mindful of that.
And Madam Chair, I would just note that we actually do have it in a separate agenda item, an update on the YoloTD project.
Great, I appreciate that. So with those things in mind, that we don't know the timing on some of the items, that we want to be sure that we have enough time to make feedback and that we can move meetings or call special meetings. If we need to, will the current agenda work for the members? And if so, can we entertain a motion?
So moved,
And that's with the correction for October 29th.
correct.
A second.
Second.
Moved by Owen, seconded by Andrew Carrillo. Is there any additional discussion? If not, and seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
All right.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, we're gonna move back in the agenda now that we have the illustrious Stephen Struger with us. And we're gonna move back to item 3, which is appointment of chair and vice chair, just to catch you up. Vice chair, we've moved the chair and I'm still it, so there you go. And now we're gonna open motions for vice chair. So, anybody want to make a motion?
I would move that Steve continue to be vice chair if he would like to. That'd be fun.
Second,
We have a motion by Andrew Grillo, a second by Owen, for Stephen Struger to continue as vice chair, and we have the acquiescence of the vice chair, so he's not being roped into it. Anybody else? Seeing none, all in favor say aye,
all right,
Aye.
and those opposed? So you're it, congratulations. So we've completed consent calendar and we're gonna move on to regular calendar at this point. Somewhere on here. And who's going to be presenting?
Good evening, members of the CEC. My name is Brenda Lomeli, and I am an assistant transportation planner at YoloTD. Today, I'm going to be giving you an update on the Yolo Active Transportation Corridor, known as the YATSE project. I'm going to be starting by providing background on the project to refresh our memories, since it's been a while that we brought this project. Following with accomplishments and closing with the next steps. So the YATSE was awarded $1.2 million in federal funds from the Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity, the RACE grant program. After months of Federal Highway Administration contracting delays, we were officially ready to begin the project. YCTD will accomplish 2 objectives. One is establishing a vision and plan for countywide active transportation corridor. This will help address mobility barriers for low-income and minority residents in Yolo County. The second objective, establish the priorities and complete construction documents for at least one corridor, and up to 3 if funding is available. I'm gonna move on to accomplishments. So YoloTD, with the help of other partner agencies, selected the project team led by Karen Pierce. We also have held our first technical advisory committee meeting, composed of City of West Sacramento, Davis, UC Davis, Woodland, and Yolo County. I will say that the feedback that we got from the TAC members was positive. Brian, will you agree that they were pretty engaging? Excited definitely about what the corridor could really do for these communities.
Just a quick note, City of Winters was invited to participate, but because of sort of a lot of their, shortly staffed and they didn't have a staff member in place that could, serve that function, they weren't able to participate in that meeting.
Also, we have completed our zero public outreach and community engagement. We collaborated with Yolo Climate Action and Adaptation Plan workshops. We attended 5 workshops. I saw some folks here that attended those workshops and also assisted on some tables. We were able to run the transportation table, and there's an excellent picture kind of showing the layout. Also during those workshops, we were able to speak about this project and get feedback from the community, aiming to get, feedback and more importantly, kind of understanding what the needs and wants of those communities were. So that was really the main goal of collaborating and definitely assisting with that. Okay. And then also we have the existing conditions that Karen Pierce, it's not there, but I kind of want to bring out that we're not only conducting outreach, but they're doing a lot of data analysis. I don't know, Brian, if you want to speak.
Yeah, so as part of this first phase of outreach, so, you've got your analysis that needs to be done. So when you go out to communities, you can share with them sort of what's going on, within the project area, so that, they can share their experiences and then take the information and then provide you with meaningful input so that we can then go back after the phase 1 outreach and start developing alternatives and identifying priority corridors. And one of the interesting, tools that they're using is sort of big data, cell phone based data and we're able to slice the different communities up into different zones, and we're able to get a really, granular understanding of where people are coming from and where they're trying to go to. So we're really excited about what that data can tell us. It tells us a lot about, what you would already expect, but it also tells you the scale and volume of people that are going from one place to another. But it's really interesting, to look at those individual zones and to think about where they're trying to go and how this project can help facilitate that, through the planning and construction of off-street trails.
With that, we're going to move to next steps on where the project is at the moment. We have selected 30 nonprofit organizations that are going to be, we're going to present this project to them, and it's scheduled for Tuesday, February 13th. We're going to be able to host this here at YoloTD, and it's between 4 and 6. It will start at 4:30 and it will go to 6 o'clock. If you guys want more information on what the list consists of or why we picked those 30, we're more than happy to provide that information. Also, we're excited to launch our phase 1 public outreach and community engagement phase. We're conducting a lot of in-person outreach with focus on underserved communities. And those are the 10, 11 communities that we're thinking for sure conducting workshops at those different agencies. So basically the purpose of this is, to learn more about the project. We want them to learn more about the project and share ideas for the planning document. Also, our first outreach is going to be in Sparta High School, and it's going to be on Thursday, February 8th. And it's gonna start at 6 o'clock. We will be providing transportation, daycare, and also some refreshments. So with that, we're gonna have Place It. That organization is more like an interactive workshop. They usually bring like different activities, and the community is gonna be able to, they cannot use their words, or they wanna kind of build something. It's going to be documented, and they will provide feedback back to us. I don't know if you wanna add anything about Place It or.
Yeah, and this is what Places specializes in is they're a subcontractor, subconsultant to Fair and Pierce, who's the prime. And what Places does is they specialize in these, interactive types of community workshops, and sort of meets people where they are, meets communities where they are, and can speak in, a language that they can understand, and gives them tools that aren't really, common in traditional outreach techniques to enable them to provide us, with meaningful input, and for them to feel like their ideas and their experiences are understood for us to be able to incorporate into the plan. So, we're fortunate to have them. They're based out of Southern California, but they are known for, doing a really good job at, engaging communities that are hard to reach, particularly those, that we're trying to target in Yolo County.
And also, I will add that one of the things that we did kind of noted is on the CAP meetings, there was little to no diversity. And again, we're excited that Place It will be able to be on these workshops. Also with that, we have an interactive story map. You can see the link there. And also what this map will do, it's basically, it will provide a project overview, also a crowd tool, and also the crowd tool. I don't know if you want to hit the link or.
Just jump in. The story map that Brenda's referencing is really sort of like, it's the portal for community engagement. And so it sort of substitutes for a website. For most people, they'll recognize it as a website, but it does sort of lay out the project, sort of more in a narrative form rather than just a static, informational website. Did you just mention the crowdsource tool? Yeah, and the crowdsource tool allows anybody to go, you can select it from the story map, and then you can go in there and you can just start inputting where you think safety issues are, what types of, facilities you think would be useful. It's really
So there you go.
intended for, people really to relate their experiences or lack thereof because of, barriers or constraints, or desire lines, right? Where would they like to go? And so they can do all of that within this tool. So, we're excited to have it. People are starting to input information, and we're gonna use it to help inform the project.
Yes, Heather, if you have her, you could just see kind of the comments.
So with that, not to jump in too quickly, but can any of the, for example, advisory committee members go to it and use it?
Absolutely, yes. Anyone that lives in Yolo County or wants to improve any feedback, anyone is welcome. We even encourage staff that lives in Yolo County that they should definitely encourage them to make a comment and or let us know what they think. Yes, next slide, please. And basically the next slide is just basically a visual letting you know where we're in the project and what's the entire project.
Yeah, so this is actually a similar flow chart to one, excuse me, that we brought to you, way back when we were first starting the project and we were about to issue an RFP for consultant selection. And so what the idea here is that, we're still fairly early in the process. we're launching phase one. We've been doing, some of this phase one outreach, which we call phase zero, by taking advantage of some Yolo climate action adaptation plan events that were already occurring. So we're able to kind of just plant the seed about this project before we launch headfirst into our own dedicated phase one. So that's where we are now. We're about to do about, a month, 2 months worth of community workshops and some heavy marketing and outreach to get the participation levels that we want. Then we will take that information and begin developing alternatives and different scenarios. And we'll go out again to, the same communities to share with them, what we've learned and how we addressed their feedback from phase one outreach. And then after that second outreach phase is completed, then, the consultants will go into plan development. And this is sort of where some components of the project split up, because as she mentioned earlier, we do have, funding for actually designing the projects, to prepare them for construction. And we're actually looking at, partnering with the city of West Sacramento, the city of, Yolo County, the Delta Protection Commission, and us, looking at potentially a SACOG grant to do planning and outreach and preliminary design work for the Clarksburg branch line trail. So trying to take advantage of a partnership opportunity that exists. We had some funding that we might be able to contribute to that project. So we're exploring that opportunity, but also keeping open the option for using some of those design funds for other segments that we identify as priorities for the project.
And with that, we can open up for questions.
So this is, as I understand it, informational item only. You're not necessarily looking for feedback on items that should be included, or maybe you are. So that, commissioners. Thank you.
Yeah, one clarifying question. So as I recall, when we heard about this project before, there were like 3 specific corridors being looked at. I think it was like Davis to Winters, Davis to Woodland, and then West Sac to Clarksburg was just, as was just mentioned. But now it seems like, now it seems like it's opened up more and there's possibilities. So it's still gonna be 3 corridors, but there's possibilities for, that it could be more anywhere in the county, like going out towards, Cape or up to Dunnigan, like more, there's more on the table than there
Yeah,
was.
it's a good question. Perhaps where some of the confusion might reside is the grant application that was funded did identify 3 specific corridors, but the plan is for a full network of off-street active transportation trails and paths. So, we're definitely not looking at only 3. We want to set the blueprint for a network. But it's possible that those 3, might become priorities, but we kind of need the outreach process to either confirm or refute that.
Okay, I see.
Molly.
So I guess how will those decisions be made about prioritizing? I noticed that establishing priorities is one of the goals, but it seems like, maybe setting some criteria for how you determine, like, obviously the challenge here is, I understand that, as a representative of Woodland, I feel like, I don't want to see Woodland's, trails go off the map here, but at the same time, I understand you're trying to kind of set different, it's not just like population-based decision-making, but I guess it's hard to understand what it would be if it's not population-based, because there is a great need here in Woodland for that route. There's a lot more need here for safe routes.
Yeah, the outreach that we do will help inform what criteria we establish, but either way, whatever segments emerge as priorities from the process, those criteria will have been helped establish from the input that we get from the communities that we're doing outreach to. So we haven't prescribed what that criteria must be at this stage, because we want to make sure that we're considering all perspectives and how we prioritize.
Right, so a follow-up question, it looks like Woodland, City of Woodland was included, but the community of Woodland was not, so I'm confused about who was spoken to. Yeah,
This was a TAP, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, the technical advisory committee has representatives from all of the local agencies, so City of West Sacramento, Yolo County, City of Winters, when they are able to staff it. Who I missed, City Davis.
yeah, no, I can see the list, but I'm just curious, if the list of community meetings, the phase one community meetings were mostly in the northern part of the county. Yeah,
Yeah, so there's two committees. There's the TAC and then also we're having the steering committee. So the steering committee, basically it's the 30 different groups that we have identified and it's throughout the county of Yolo. So it's the 30 non-profit organizations.
If I can jump in,
So where's
you know,
that
I think you, both, Molly and Andy have put your finger on one of the internal paradoxes in the grant application itself, which none of us were here when that was submitted, right? And you all, maybe some of you were serving on the committee at the time and had some input onto this, but it's a little bit confusing because it says, we're gonna do a countywide plan that's gonna identify priorities. And oh, by the way, here are some of the priorities, right? So it's a little bit of a both and. And I think, you know, the way we've sort of scoped and designed this project is to, you know, recognizing the importance of those priority corridors, but also wanting to, you know, create space for other priorities to emerge, because there was not a lot of outreach that was done when this grant application, when the grant application was prepared. So I think that's the approach that we as a team have discussed. But, you know, but the point is well taken, that we don't want to ignore the needs for connectivity between the larger cities, which were very much called out as well, in the grant application. I think that the critical piece here, particularly when it comes to the outreach, is to make sure that those needs are, you know, those communities have local constituencies that are active in these processes. And that's part of the reason those priorities have already been identified. But we really want to make sure we're hearing from those other communities who are not as vocal and who are not as kind of engaged in kind of countywide discussions around active transportation.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in there for just a moment. So when I was with Yolo Housing and we were handling community development block grant for the county of Yolo, one of the things that we did do was go out to a majority of the unincorporated rural communities who don't use, and what we found in that was that they didn't find easy access points to talk about what their needs are to either the county or the other communities. And that transit needs routinely were in the top three, no matter where in the county that we were, and have the least amount of connectivity. So I get that issue, and I do also think that it's not an either or, because many of those folks actually wanted transportation into the larger community, so there are ways to kind of thread that needle. And I guess part of what I'm hearing is, one, you'll have some nonprofits that will represent give you good coverage and help with the outreach. And second, everybody should go use the tool and give it to all your friends so that they can do the crowdsourcing. And with that.
Yeah, thank you. I, of course, have a question about outreach. The Yolo County, it looks like, let's see, I lost it in here. It looks like some outreach has been done though. And I think my question about outreach is more about the tool. I think it's a great tool and an opportunity for people to kind of tell you where there's a need and a priority. I'm just curious what the kind of long-term plan for like getting the tool in front of people is. So, so does that go beyond the pre-outreach, the pre-engagement you've done? And then what are we looking at?
Is the tool you're referring to, the mapping tool that we were showing you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're not sharing all the information about the project just because there's a lot that we're doing. We're trying to, you know, sort of hit the highlights, but we do have, you know, a marketing strategy and plan that's going to, you know, broadcast the project. And we've done quite a bit already, had press releases and social media, you know, promotions and those kinds of things. So, you know, so the word's getting out and, you know, we'll continue to do that because, yeah, it's, that tool is not only intended to be used for, you know, for the folks that are, participants of these targeted outreach events. And to just, tie the bow on Molly's point about, she wasn't seeing like the community of Woodland or the communities of West Sacramento or Davis. The reason for that is that we're highlighting targeted communities that typically don't get, that get overlooked in outreach processes. And so we're focusing on them, but the incorporated cities have sort of internal processes and internal infrastructure for us to kind of do outreach and get what we need, the input we need from, from those sort of, more sophisticated communities. So I think that's why you're not seeing them in this list.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for that. I guess I was just, obviously you can't put an exhaustive list of your outreach in here, but I was just wondering, just because I think that there's inequities in how these things are reached sometimes too, right? I mean, I think this is a great tool that's gonna work really well on like a desktop. Is there, I don't know if does it do pretty well on mobile and it's not tested and then, just, kind of what barriers, do you think exists for them? Because I would love for people to be able to use this great tool. That's all I'm thinking.
This tool, it's one of many tools that we're using to help people engage and, Brenda can elaborate on this as well, but, these structured events that we have listed here, those are gonna be using different tools, right? Those are gonna be using the place it tool where it's one-on-one interactive, talking to people and not, forcing people to go to a website and, there are people that have different input needs. And we're trying to make it accessible to as many people as possible, kind of in the form that they want to give that input. So to directly answer the question, no, that tool, that mapping tool isn't the only one. It's just one of many ways that we're, helping people provide their input.
Yeah, we're going to, like, I just want to give you an example. We're going to the Almond Festival and want to do an interactive with the public. And we know that the Almond Festival, there's many folks that come from different areas of the county. And the goal here is to do multiple maps of, Woodland, West Sac, Yolo County in general. And we want folks to kind of identify that either the corridors that they would like to see or the needs of infrastructure and bring it back, put it on the tool, but really interact and meet people where they're at. We have contact different apartment complex, low income complexes, talk to the property manager. We contact Yolo County Housing Authority and mention if there's like a resident meeting that we could attend so we could promote this kind of stuff. Another thing that we want to do, we want to go out to the food bank and different locations throughout the county and pass flyers and kind of like, talk about the project while they're waiting for the food. So just there's different things that we're trying to kind of do to meet folks where they're at. Also, we have UC Davis from CRC, right, the experts to really, if you want to elaborate into that.
UC Davis Center for Regional Change is also a sub-consultant on the project, and they've, were able to sort of use their expertise in this area and their connections to help us, continue to reach deeper into communities that are hard to get the participation on and for which traditional channels don't either resonate or even reach them. So that's where we are with it.
That's great. Thank you for that extra info. And then I just also wanted to ask if I could see the list. It could be sent to me, the list of other.
Actually, can you send that to the members? Because we have other members who'd like to see that as well. But with that, you do bring up a good equity point, which is have you reached out to folks like Walter Regional to talk about folks who might be neurodivergent or have other disabilities? So making sure we're being as inclusive as possible.
Yeah, our organizational outreach started with about 180 different organizations, most of them in Yolo County, some of them extending into Sacramento County, such as Alta Regional Center. So yeah, they're all on the distribution list. You have different sort of levels of engagement, with different organizations, and if that's one of particular interest or you're aware that they might have an interest in the project, then we can follow up with them and talk with them more directly.
Appreciate that. So, I'm gonna ask for public engagement, then take another turn around the table. So, is there anybody in the audience who'd like to, give input on this item? Seeing none, is there anyone online who would like to do so?
We do have one public comment online.
And you're live.
Hello,
Hello.
I have a comment because I apologize, I was having some difficulty getting in and so I missed the public comments, but I'll try to do that next month. My concern is when you say you've done outreach and there's diversity, I haven't,
Excuse me, could you state your name for the record, please, first?
I'm Commissioner Gavin with the Davis Senior Commission.
Great, thank you, welcome. Okay, continue.
And I have not seen any information about your organization on any Unitrans bus. So I'm not sure. I've heard what you said, but outreach is something where you need to be as thorough as possible, in my opinion. And I would like to know, have you considered reaching out to senior citizen centers? And also, would you consider reaching out to the Davis Senior Commission? And have you outreach to high schools in these areas? Because students catch the bus as well. In addition to the community college in West Sacramento, and also, I'm not sure how you would do it, but I happen to have been at a bus stop early one morning at 7th and West Capitol, and you have people who live in Sacramento and they work in West Sacramento, and there is really no transportation to get anyone there around 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning on a weekend. So that outreach needs to be broadened some more, in my opinion. And so I don't hear seniors being mentioned. That may be something that's on your agenda. I don't see that. I'm looking at tonight's agenda, but that is something very broad that should be looked at. And as I said, I think high school students should be considered with the interactive map as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I really appreciate that. Before we move, maybe you can just touch on your outreach for seniors and youth.
Yeah, and just so the commenter is aware, you know, lots of different demographics have different transportation needs, but just so that she's aware, this is an active transportation project, so we're talking about walking and bicycling, and if that applies to her comment, then, you know, that's great. But at the scale which we're doing this project at countywide, you know, there's gonna be some, you know, obvious, you know, bandwidth limitations to who we can directly do outreach to. So we are gonna have to rely on sort of networks of people. I mean, we'll do as much as we can, and if there are specific organizations that that the committee feels like we should reach out to, then there might be some organizations that we don't hit directly, but that, you know, we're gonna try to cast as wide of a net as possible as we can. But the point's well taken, and we'll see what we can do to address the needs for seniors with active transportation.
So with that, just thinking sort of logistically for the CAC, would that mean that once you mail the list of the 30, if we have additions, we can just independently send them in? Or is there time to re-agendize this in the next meeting? I think you'll probably be too far along by then. So maybe you can talk a little bit about timing.
Yeah, I'd say what we could do is we could put what we have on like a SharePoint share file, and then if you feel like we're missing organizations or certain constituencies, then yeah, we'll definitely make sure that they receive the message.
So I really want to make sure that we're complying with the Brown Act. So a SharePoint file where we can actually commune together would be bad. So we want to make sure that if we're going to do that offline, that we're just sending them to you.
Good point. I wasn't thinking about that.
Any additional, questions for, the group?
I've got one.
One for Olin and then one for Andy.
Does this include disabled? I get it that active transportation is a new term for bike ped. Does it also include disabled?
Maybe you can elaborate, are you implying or asking whether or not the end facilities that are constructed are disabled accessible, or
No.
it's for all users?
Good, okay, that was my question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Andrew.
Thank you. So just, I think one just kind of some food for thought to consider as this outreach proceeds in you get more perspective on different people's experiences and needs is, and this I'm speaking as someone who's evaluated state active transportation program applications and just seeing how like the projects that seem to be most successful in that are ones that are really targeted and really like efficiently and cost efficiently connect places where maybe gaps in the existing network, as well as maybe gaps, or there might be gaps in transit where active transportation can play a key role in feeding people into the network. So even if the overall vision for the network is to ultimately get to a point where we have a countywide system of off-road, off-street bike and pedestrian paths, like just thinking of, and for some of the most immediate steps, I mean, one thing to consider is to be looking at some interim steps, like looking at which roads might be better to bike or walk on versus which are more hostile, like a pull line or a Highway 128 or something like that, and thinking of some of those spots where there can be a really targeted investment that helps feed people into the network. Like, for example, like just north of Davis, like connecting like a connection to a road 103 or something going west of Winners out towards like Lake Solano and Stebbins, where people could access like the relatively safe infrastructure between Davis and Winners or the B line. Just getting some food for thought to consider as this moves ahead.
Yeah, it's all being looked at comprehensively with sort of those variables in mind. And what we can also do is we can send you, the scope of work for our consulting team when we awarded this, back, I want to say about a year ago. And then we had to wait about a year because of FHWA delays. But that will help give you, I think, broader perspective of how we're approaching the entire project. Because we're just really sort of focusing on sort of what we've been doing up to this point and what the immediate next steps. And, not intending to go sort of deep into the scope of work of the project itself.
Thank you. And, okay, last word is Molly's.
I just want to speak to your concern about the mobile friendliness of this app, and I did try it. And I got to upvote something, but I couldn't place anything. So there are certainly some limitations for mobile use, which I think is a barrier to access, some communities who may not have access to desktops or using tablets so it's just something to consider, maybe thinking about trying to make sure that it's tested better on mobile, because not everyone has a computer. But really, I mean, a lot of people have phones now.
Mobile optimized matters. Give me a bunch of pictures. Thank you very much. All right, that takes us to item 6, which is the scope of work for the upcoming short range transit plan update, and for us to give feedback to staff.
All right. Good to see you guys. Today I'm going to present on the scope of work for our short range transit plan, provide some context for what is a short range transit plan, the purpose for why we're going out with consultant, the scope specifically as it ties to what we're looking to achieve within our short range transit plan, and then the schedule that we have proposed. And so with that, I'll get going. You have the next slide, Heather. So just at a broad overview, short range transit plan is really the strategic framework for any transit agency that sets out from 5 to 10 years their goals sets out the goals for what the transit agency aims to accomplish on service operations, while taking into account what is the current demographics or state of the transit service that is being operated, what is the surrounding environment. There can be different key focuses within short range transit plans. that amendment, it does need to provide a financial overview from the transit agency, as well as a capital overview in terms of what is the current infrastructure, rolling stock, the state of goods, and then also the funding associated with what is the current financial status, as well as grants that are being pursued as it relates to certain objectives that the transit agency outlines. So keeping that in context, it also includes for agencies that operate paratransit service, their plan, and then if there's microtransit agencies would include kind of their plan and ridership figures and analysis as it relates to those services that they operate. So we'll go to the next slide. So within the short range transit plan, just kind of go into some details, it's federally required. So for us, this is really important in terms of how do we secure future federal funds. We're to apply for grants while also making sure we are in compliance. It's an evolving document, so it's not really static in a sense that once a short range transit plan is executed, that to a T, everything is finalized and we have to kind of build on that. Depending on changes that happen in real time, a proceeding short range transit plan can have different information. A good example I would say is kind of between our previous short range transit plan and the one that we're looking to go out for contract. We've had COVID, we've had service interruptions, we've had to reduce service. We've experienced a large amount of different hardships. So with that being said, we can just look at the previous plan and say, okay, well, we're gonna go back to it. The dynamics have changed in terms of like how people move within our county. And so in that sense, it's just something to note that this is an ongoing kind of iterative document. There's a huge requirement as well for community engagement. So we kind of talked about that with our previous item, but this is essential to making sure that the public has the chance to participate and provide their feedback to make this document as full and complete as it can be, as well as getting community support. And then in terms of a roadmap for funding, this document also allows us to be used when we go out for applying for future grant funds, because as I referenced earlier, our operational kind of success and the projects that were put forth in this document can be used inside of when we're going out for competitive projects. So that's just kind of going over the short range transit plan like requirements and kind of purpose and the need. So we'll go to the next slide. And so as it relates to YoloTD specifically, what we're looking at, right, sorry, let's see. We'll go to the next slide, I covered this. So as it pertains to YoloTD specifically, our scope of work and what we're looking to cover is an existing conditions analysis. The reason for this really is due to the effects of COVID. So we had done a comprehensive operational analysis previously, and that was completed right before we had kind of COVID and our service interruptions and kind of had to reduce service, and now we're kind of looking to revamp. But during that, what we also had wanted to do was look at kind of how are people interacting on our different highway systems that we operate service within, our 42, and using cell phone data and kind of being able to take a look at with work from home environment, how are people moving within Yolo County? How are people interacting with the different cities that we operate service in? And then use that as our foundation as we begin to build out our roadmap for providing service for the next 7 years. And so that's a big component of going into this scope of work for our short range transit plan. As I said, with the community engagement, it's a required component within our short range transit plan. We are currently, we've been in conversation with the city of Davis because they are also going out for their short range transit plan as well. And I believe they'll be getting into contract within the next few weeks or so. And so at least as it relates to the public outreach and engagement for the city of Davis, we've had good conversations going back and forth just to leverage and utilize both of our consultant resources targeted specifically for that community. But we also still have a plan within our scope for making sure that we're reaching all of our communities that we're operating service within. And then the ability to subcontract out if there's certain hard to reach areas for different groups. So not limiting it to just Davis, but wanted to highlight that given that they are also going out in contract, we're maximizing that kind of communication and partnership. Exploring service alternatives. So one of the other items within our scope that we're looking at is at least forecasting how would some potential BRT be used. And so that During actually just on a side note, receiving some comments from the Woodland Transit Center survey, a large amount of people were asking about some express service between Davis to Woodland. And so within that, we were thinking about also including that within our scope in terms of identifying certain corridors based on demand from the public of where we could have these BRT type services, how would they look, how would they be feasible, and incorporate that into our short range transit plan scope. Again, thinking about how can we kind of have, how can we begin to build our operations and be forward thinking with the different changes within our county. And then within the service plan recommendations, this kind of ties into the BRT, this ties into exploring service alternatives specifically. So we have a robust amount of projects and operational services to look at. But again, I want to kind of tie into the financial plan development of 3 fiscal scenarios. This is contingent on our cash flow and our funding. So the service plan and the implementation while exploring different service alternatives is contingent on the financial health. And so within that, we're taking a look at not just one scenario of how we are currently doing, but what would be more of a fiscally conservative scenario. If there was kind of a transit, what's the term, the transit fiscal cliff. We kind of have a status quo scenario that we want the consultants to also look at. And we also want a surplus scenario. So if we are able to achieve a large amount of our grant funding and other opportunities, what would be the process that we could kind of phase out expanding service? Molly, did you have a question?
No, Brian, I'll wait. I think this is more in the executive director's report, like about the ridership stuff.
Yeah, we can get through the presentation.
Oh, good, yeah. We'll go to the next slide, Heather. And so that brings us to the schedule. And so on January 23rd, we issued the RFP. And we have our pre-proposal meeting set for February 5th. Deadline for questions, February 12th. And then submissions will be due March 1st, and we plan to award the contract date April 13th. One thing that was specified internally is kind of the need to have this short range transit plan completed on a more expedited schedule. So we have, what we're ideally looking for is a roughly 8-month timeline to complete the short range transit plan entirely. And so with that, kind of bringing this to you guys, there is a period in which we can take your feedback and comments. And when we do have our pre-proposal meeting, let the consultants know just kind of additional insights into what we're kind of looking for potential proposals. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that because I know that Andy did say that, you do want timing to be able to comment prior to. And so just emphasizing that you do have the ability to still provide comments in which I can post as like an FAQ for consulting, or let them know during our proposal meeting.
I appreciate that. And also, I think the committee's been pretty vocal about making sure that before it goes to a vote, that you also have the value of comments from members. So kind of a 2-bite at the apple thing.
Yep, and Madam Chair, I would just speak to the timing of this item, that we were not planning to bring this forward so quickly, until we learned that the city of Davis was going to be starting their SRTP, and that there was we thought a lot of value in not sort of trailing that effort by 3 months, because we would be, clearly the short range transit plan for the city of Davis and Unitrans and our plan, those are very much intertwined, particularly as Courtney mentioned, when it comes to community engagement and not wanting to go and ask communities the same questions twice. And that some feedback that the community might have is going to be more appropriate for Unitrans when it comes to local service, and some of the feedback is going to be more appropriate for people who are commuting longer distances. So based on the desire to align those timelines and hearing from the city of Davis that they were not really able to slow down, we decided to kind of accelerate this one, which is why, we did not bring this to you at your last meeting, which would have then preceded the board vote. But as Courtney mentioned, we're going through this process to select a consultant. Until we have actually signed a contract with a consultant, we can, make changes to the scope of work. The consultants will be proposing how they think they can best, achieve these goals. as we're reviewing and vetting those proposals, we can also think about the input that we hear from you and then negotiate with consultants on any changes. If there are things that emerge from your feedback that we, you know, are really essential to making sure this project is successful.
Appreciate that. Is that the presentation?
Yes,
You ready to hear from everybody?
I am.
Who wants to go first?
What's the range of it's expected to be?
In terms of the number?
Yeah.
I can't give you.
Do you have an engineer's estimate or?
I would guess for this, I guess given the nature of also Davis going out, it could be some overlap, so 5 to 10.
Okay, and Andy?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. So, regarding the Davis, Davis and then YoloTD, both are going ahead with the short range transit plans on a similar timeframe. And earlier this month at our Bicycling Transportation and Street Safety Commission meeting, we had a really good discussion on Transportation Act local development funds. As a refresher, those are the for other members, those are the funds that can be used for transit, both operations or capital projects, but often a regional claim, there's no unmet transit needs. I mean, even if it's like transit's like 1 trip a day that involves 8 transfers and takes many hours, they'll claim that's meeting transit needs and divert that funding to road maintenance or road projects. But in that discussion, it's Davis's plan that Davis plans to make what's in the short range transit plans for Unitrans and Yolo bus the priority for local transportation funding going ahead. For the past several years, they've been subbing in CARES Act funding, but then once that runs out, the local transportation funds, or at least some of it, will be going back to transit. And again, what's in that short range transit plan will be the priority for that. So with that in mind, one question that I had is, would it be possible in the short range transit plan to be really clear about like, here's the level of service that could be provided if current levels of local transportation funds were maintained versus if we're fully dedicated to transit, you could increase by this much, and then I mean, maybe some interim options as well. And of course, the fiscal cliff could factor in too. It could be at current levels, you'd have to reduce service, and then it would take more to sustain what you have. But would it be possible to clearly, clearly state that, so that, because I think that would really help outline this effectively for elected officials and policymakers to make the decisions on how those funds are used.
Yeah, no, we definitely can. I know that's been a big emphasis, especially coming from Autumn, is making sure we have our financial scenarios explicitly stated and how that could lead to future implications without leading one way or the other. So yes, that is something we're definitely looking at. It's also why we're trying to gather as much data and information and think holistically about how we go about this short range transit plan. So we're not just only stuck in one scenario, kind of like when we did the COA and it was contingent on, on things going business as usual. So with that in mind, we've kind of learned from that and have incorporated that into the scope.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, to add on to Courtney's comment, I think in a sort of future expansion scenario, we would be looking at sort of, prioritization of what additional services could be offered based on sort of different, assumptions of additional funding, right? So, it doesn't necessarily have to be a, more TDA or less TDA. It could be more of lots of stuff. It could be more grants. It could be, a windfall from the state. But I think when you're looking at a future expansion scenario, you're really looking at what more can we do than we're doing now? And how much would each of those additional sort of service enhancements cost and which ones would we prioritize doing? So I think that, we can fit your logic into the process that we're doing. Even within the status quo, scenario, status quo doesn't necessarily mean operational status quo, because we don't know if we've optimized our existing routes based on changing demographics, growth, land use, all sorts of, commuting patterns and so forth. So we'll be looking within that scenario as well at, different, potential service alternatives, to make sure that we're most effectively using the funding that we do have.
Other feedback? Ethan?
Thanks to Andy for talking about Unitrans and Yolo bus, but I didn't hear Davis Community Transit very important as well. And I was thinking back, what really got our family using the bus was doing a tour of bus path for Unitrans and kind of answer questions like what happens if three people with wheelchairs need to get on, there's only room for two, and they have backup buses, maybe not a whole one, but one of the smaller buses. And the other thing that can get people kind of thinking about it is if you're dropping your car off at the mechanic, sometimes they have the service will take you home. That's not always the case. And I had that experience recently. I thought, oh, Unitrans, that's an easy choice. But and then the other thing that's happened in Davis, I think it's usually May or so, or April, May, Yolo bus in the past has had encouragement of seniors, citizens to ride the bus, and they have Yolo bus and Unitrans maybe do, and I think Davis Community Transit representatives as well. So getting people that see all these buses, but to actually ride one, they can be free some days during air quality as well, but sometimes that's a hurdle for people just used to driving with their cars and not taking advantage of what's available.
Any comments? I have some, but I think we'll go to the public and we'll mix it up and we'll see if there's anybody online first this time who would like to make comments.
You don't have anyone online?
Okay, and is there anyone in the audience who would like to make comments on this? Seeing none, I'm going to turn prerogative and make all mine. I appreciate hearing about land use because I do think we are in the crux of changing uses and there's been a lot of change at the state in housing and sort of the elimination of single family zoning, and over time that is actually going to do land use changes, and thinking earlier is gooder about what that will look like. So I appreciate that. I also think that, especially if you're in a under-resourced area like Winters, the sort of relationship between beeline, paratransit, and fixed route is a thing. Especially since paratransit, for example, has to operate within the sort of slimmed down hours of the beeline that has connectivity issues. And given the popularity of the route between Davis and Vacaville, there are at times sort of competing uses for the beeline itself. And so maybe if it's fiscal cliff conservative, we get to build everything. There can be some look at the interrelationship between those three items. And then I noticed in that this is not unique to Winters, but is also the case in other sort of more rural areas that there is often inadequate space for waiting for transit. In particular, for example, in Winters out at City Hall, it is a completely open bus stop, and so there's no shade. It is a concreted area, and Winters is probably one of the hottest points in the county, so they can be 115 or more there, and there's literally no shade. That is the case in other sort of under-resourced areas. So if we can actually look also at the infrastructure in this, I think that would be really important. And because I want an equity kick tonight, I am really interested in better signage at bus stops so that people who maybe don't have a mobile phone or other way to know where all these interesting numbers go could have some kind of a visual aid that would do that. And for those on the committee who don't know, there was a great video on that from Ottawa, Canada, from a sort of guerrilla bus signage guy, which I passed on to staff. But that one video was really an eye opener as to how easily you could improve equity and so cost effectively. So this is a great opportunity in short range transit to think about sort of amenities and signage and that whole rider experience. Those are my comments. Anything else from others?
I just wanted to appreciate the kind of consideration or like awareness, I guess, that, Davis is working on this and kind of taking like an interjurisdictional, like multi-jurisdictional kind of tack here. I mean, like the comment about not wanting to go ask the same questions to the same communities twice, I think is like a good catch. And wanted to commend you all on that, because I think that that happens so often. Just love the opportunity to collaborate with like other cities and agencies and, hope that, the whole service territory, gets to come along for the ride on this. So, ways for West Sac, I think, Chair Baker's comments kind of provoke some thought in the bus stops that I see in the mornings and, things like lighting too. I mean, all winter I saw people standing out in the dark waiting for buses and things like that. So, appreciate your comments and the kind of thought provoking nature of them.
Yeah, all of what the committee members are raising are things that we're intending to address in the short range transit plan. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to have a system and a service network that's not just possible to use, but inviting to use. So things like, new standards for, bus stops. We have a bus stop inventory. We know what the conditions of our existing bus stops are, thanks to Cassandra over there who's done that. So we're gonna take that and we're gonna, the idea, like I said, is to, try to, elevate, what we're doing and to, provide the amenities that people need to use transit by choice and not only as a necessity. And, infrastructure is part of that, including, the public right of way. We're also looking into, what we can do with, what opportunities there are for traffic signal timing and, signal preemption, those types of things, because, transit needs to be able to compete on a travel time basis, within people's tolerances, otherwise they won't use it. They won't make multiple transfers. So, we're aware of all these sort of barriers to transit for people to not want to use it by choice. And we want to use this plan to help, address as many of those as possible.
Any additional comments? Seeing none, do you have the feedback that you need from us?
We did, thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that. A good report, thank you, and thank you, Cassandra, for your work on the bus shelters.
Shout out to Cassandra on that, really. She and a team of interns, she went to every single bus stop that we use in Yolo County and put it in GIS and captured the photographs and looked at what amenities it had and what it lacked. So really great data set to help inform.
There's a really nice one at Yolo House in El Rio Village.
That good.
It's a mini transit center. That takes us to item 7. 6 to 3 jurisdictions. Who's presenting on item 7?
Good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. The item before you at the moment relates to the Yolo Eating Managed Lanes project. So obviously there's probably full awareness of, within the group that this project exists, right? So it's a very complex, detailed, exhausting project. And so, the purpose of today's item is to just kind of bring you up to speed with where we are and really the formation of a regional joint powers association. If you're interested in all of the gory background and twists and turns and peaks and valleys of how this project has played out to date, then, you'll want to look at the YoloTD, board meeting archives and all of our status updates. And then, if you can stay awake while doing that, then you'll understand kind of how we got to where we are. So we're happy to answer any of the questions about the process or leading up to where we are today, but we are gonna focus kind of on sort of, the significant milestone that we just passed, regionally in terms of establishing a regional tolling authority. So that's sort of the context of this presentation. But of course, Autumn and I are happy to discuss about other project aspects as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so one single slide on the project background, just for anybody who needs a reorientation to it. YoloTD Managed Lanes Project, or called Corridor Improvement Project, depending on whether you're talking Caltrans or us, is a freeway expansion project, one new lane in each direction, between the Solano County line and Sacramento County lines to the east on 80 and 50 split. So the project is being cleared environmentally for the entire project area, but we have an interior segment that we're focusing on in the short term, that we call phase one essentially. So the project objectives here are obviously, we know there's, traffic congestion issues and there's safety issues out there as well. The project's also intended to support goods movement, and we also want to, make this a corridor where, alternative transportation is possible, whether it's by bicycling or transit, and to make transit more time competitive with, traveling by automobile. From a project management standpoint, we are partnering with Caltrans. You're probably already aware of that. We have the keys essentially to the infra funds that we were awarded in partnership with Caltrans about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago now, when that funding was awarded. And the timing of when that funding needs to be obligated, is very much a factor in sort of how this has played out over the last 8 months and what we still have to do over the next 8 months. So next slide. Looks like I already covered the funding. Now, in the context of this regional JPA, we recognized early in this process, when we were prioritizing, a toll managed lane as our organizational priority, that we wanted to establish. We felt like the best way to do this would be to bring the region along with us. We could have tried to go alone and establish our own tolling authority, but we have neither the bandwidth nor the resources nor the expertise to do that. So we knew that it made the most sense to do this at the regional level. And so starting way back in May of last year, we engaged all of the countywide transportation agencies and Caltrans and SACOG about, hey, this is where we think our project is headed. Here's a timeline which we need to have the infra funding obligated. Let's see, how we can collaborate on this and see if we can get to a place where everybody would want to, at some point, join a regional tolling authority. I don't know if you feel like you need to step in if I'm missing anything.
You're doing great.
All right, good. If I misspeak, just jump right in there. And so the initial partnership, because ours is the first project in the region, and there aren't any other segments in the region that are proposing tolling and have funding awarded or obligated. We felt like it made the most sense for YoloTD, SACOG, and Caltrans to kind of be the initial members. It's also gonna be really hard to bring along everybody in the region, given the time constraints that we were working within. But nonetheless, SACOG as a major partner in the three-party JPA has an entire board of elected officials of 30
Million.
30 million, may as well be 30 million, 30 something representatives who also represent, all these other counties, right? So they had to make sure that they went through their own internal process to bring their 30 something member board along with them. We just had our own board we had to deal with, right? And so, even, internally, we needed to make sure that they were comfortable with what we were doing. But we're all in the same county, we all had, at least some commonality. And so there were issues that were raised within the SACOG environment, they're both in their transportation committee and their board about sort of what representation on this future JPA would look like. What is the, what would the voting on this, board look like? How would the board grow? Is this, with the balance between regional representation and local interests, right? If you've got a segment in your, in your jurisdiction, you're obviously gonna have a greater interest in that and are gonna wanna have, a fair say in what happens, in that project. And then also what Sacramento County representation would look like. And I sort of skipped past the first part, but a lot of them had real concerns about Caltrans being a member. And our board raised a little bit of a concern there. But we felt like Caltrans, has a direct stake in the success and the operations of it. They own the facilities, right? And so simply from a, democratic principle standpoint, if you own the facility, then you would inherently want to have, some voting representation on this board. And we agreed with that in general, and that's kind of where our board landed was to support them having a voting seat on the JPA. But nonetheless, the rest of the region wasn't necessarily on board with that, and so we had to go through a series of meetings and conversations with them in December and January, for them to feel comfortable with sort of how we were proposing to organize the JPA and how it would evolve over time. All right, next slide. All right, and I sort of alluded to what this structure looks like, but the way it lines up is, so there'll be 3 original members. Yolo would have 2 voting seats. They'll be appointed by the Yolo Transportation District. Caltrans would have 1 voting seat. SACOG would have 1 voting seat per county where there's a project, and then 1 at-large voting seat that they would just appoint from anyone within the SACOG board. So that's how it's going to, that's how it's formed now. As new projects come into the region, new tolling projects, because this is a tolling authority, then, and there are thresholds that must be crossed, but then additional representation would then occur on the JPA. So say SAC 5 project between the airport and downtown Sacramento, they meet the criteria for joining the JPA. Then they would join the JPA, they would get 2 voting seats, and then they'll be appointed by, in this case, Sacramento Transportation Authority, because they're the regional transportation agent, countywide transportation agency that has representation from all the local agencies in Sacramento County. And then SACOG would also appoint one more representative from within that county. So you have regional and local representation roughly in equal or close proportion to each other. So the way this looks as we extend out, you can see that's what it sort of looks like. We're using little chess pieces. The green piece with the blue outline is sort of that Yolo County representative appointed by SACOG. In this case, that appointment was made to be Oscar Villegas in West Sacramento. So, and then our board appointed Josh Chapman and Dante Early. That's who's comprising our board at this point. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then SACOG for their at-large seat appointed Supervisor Patrick Kennedy from Sacramento. And then with Caltrans, I don't think they've made an appointment officially, but because they currently do not have a district director, Amarjeet Banapal retired at the end of the year, and they had a acting, and now they have an interim. And then is going to be a permanent person, so it's a 3-step process. So we're at this stage, not entirely sure who that person is going to be from Caltrans District 3, but it will be someone from District 3 at the deputy level.
Right. There's lots of backstory, to a lot of this, but so we're just kind of sharing with you, the outcomes of, the sausage making of this organization. So the next slide, please. So, like I
Madam
said.
Chair. Question, Brian, who was the last person that was appointed in Yolo County? You said Villegas,
Yeah,
Josh Chapman,
Yeah.
and who was the third?
Dr.
So it's a Yolo County representative, a City of Davis representative, and a City of West Sacramento representative. Not that that's what the JPA explicitly specified. Those were the independent decisions that the SACOG board made and the YoloTD board made to have those 3 jurisdictions represented.
Why is Oscar, I assume it's Oscar that's got the blue line around it?
That's correct, because he is not on the YoloTD board, he's on the SACOG board, and SACOG appointed him.
I got it.
Yeah, that's sometimes hard to mentally wrap your arms around it. I sometimes struggle with it.
A state representative of the.
It's a very
Yeah.
intricate system, right? But it's really
Yeah.
intended to, provide the best balance of perspectives and representation that, that the region can offer. And I think, even though it's, challenging to visualize sometimes, it's really kind of an elegant solution. So when Sacramento gets their project and they get their 3 representatives, Heather, next slide, and if and when El Dorado and Placer County have towing projects, then they'll join us too, for a maximum of 14 representatives. And that's what it'll look like. We don't expect, El Dorado County or, maybe even Placer County to be, a near-term, have near-term projects, but the agreement and that is in place for the JPA explicitly identifies them and enables them to join if and when they do. Next slide, please. So again, thinking back to the SACOG situation where they were in, their board had, lots of different concerns. And so what SACOG staff did was go back and analyze some of the alternatives and ideas that their board members had. And then sort of distilled it down into different areas of risk and different areas of representation. So regionalism versus local representation, risk and SACOG versus risk to our project. And SACOG risk, they were really sort of concerned about financial backstops and taking on liability and so forth. With the YOLO 80 risk, we're really talking about will any of these options affect the timing of our project and the ability to obligate the funds that we have for it. And so that option 2A was the best balance of all 4 of those, and the SACOG staff was able to get almost unanimous support from the SACOG board to support that alternative, and we as well were able to get full support from our board for that alternative as well. So the hard work paid off.
And Caltrans signed it.
And Caltrans signed it. Next slide, please.
Not a small feat, no board, but it's not a small feat.
This is a duplicate slide. Can you advance past it, please? Okay, so we only have a few slides left, but the next steps here is, in order to exercise your desire to implement tolling, you need to get authority from the California Transportation Commission. So that involves submitting a toll facility application. So that will be the Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority, CARTA. That's the new JPA. That will be their responsibility to submit that application. And so that application is being drafted and is underway now. And there's 3 main criteria for a tolling application, you have to be able to demonstrate corridor performance improvement. There needs to be a demonstration of regional support amongst stakeholders, your regional MPO, and so forth. And then also has to be feasible operationally and probably even more importantly, financially viable. Next slide. And then within that tolling facility application are sort of the operational assumptions that that has to be essentially presented to California Transportation Commission. We won't go through all these bullets, but this is a companion document with the tolling application, and it outlines, what the facility design and what the entrance and exit assumptions are going to be, what technology you'll be using, what the different organizational roles will be. Do you have your enforcement agreement in place? Do you have operations and maintenance? Do you have your back end office in place? All those types of things. So we need to demonstrate to them that we know what we're going to do and how we're going to do it.
And if I could just jump in, one thing I think is important to state is that the concept of operations is a required piece of the application. However, it is not the final toll ordinance that will actually take effect. That has to be developed through a process that involves the public and stakeholders and then adopted by the tolling authority board, in this case, CARTA. So the concept of operations, basically is to demonstrate that you have thought it through and that you have a plan. But, whether or not, if the hours of operation are the same, if what the toll rates are, whether or not Teslas get to go for free, is there an equity program? All of these different pieces will be developed by the tolling authority board prior to the lane beginning operations. So there's a lot of assumptions in here, but it is by no means a done deal for the CTC's, what's being submitted to the CTC. I just wanted to pause on that one because I think it's an important one.
That's a state requirement or federal?
It's a state requirement under AB 194.
Okay, next slide. So the other issue that seemed to be of a lot of significant importance at the regional level was who gets to spend the money. And to be honest, the way that the YoloTD project is probably playing out, there isn't going to be a ton of excess revenue, but nonetheless, we needed to have a framework in place, within the JPA agreement that kind of outlined how we were going to handle that. And so that was a big point of negotiation, between us and SACOG and them, representing all of their member agencies. But this flow chart here just sort of shows you that, there's required expenses that have to be prioritized with the tolling revenue that you generate. And then you can start looking at, okay, then if you have net revenue, then these are the other, this is the other sequence of priorities that you need to work your way through before you can kind of get to that, discretionary funding on things that you'd like to have. So, yeah, ultimately, it will be CARTA's responsibility to establish a tolling revenue expenditure plan that will include all these different buckets. And then that'll be sort of the plan by which they'll be spending the funding. Might not have been totally clear, but we can follow up with questions after. Okay, and so I think this is the last slide. So the YoloTD board had been, actively engaged in this for the past, I want to say year and a half, with regular updates, lots of, direction given over the course of time. So we did bring this JPA agreement to them on the 22nd, last Monday, and they ultimately did approve the JPA agreement that we had developed in partnership with SACOG and Caltrans. And then also consenting to the tolling authority, which didn't actually exist at that time until after they took action, consenting to submission of this toll facility application to the CTC. So that concludes the presentation. Sorry, it might have been a little long-winded, but I wanted to make sure that we clarified some of the detailed points in there.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And are there comments or questions from members? Andrew?
Thank you. So one question, just touching on one of those later points on the use of toll revenue. I noticed on the, you mentioned that you said like the actual availability beyond some of those required expenses could be limited. And then I noticed that pay-as-you-go capital projects were listed, but I did not see anything about transit operation. Is a transit operation an eligible use of capital of the toll revenues? And if so, would you estimate a significant amount of being available for that, or would it be fairly minimal?
Yeah, so let's back up and, or explain that whole sort of world of what the project can do to help improve corridor performance besides just adding a new travel lane. So, the waterfall exhibit that you saw, that's just a generalized, flow chart. It applies to any tolling project, anywhere in the country. It's not specific to ours. So those are just, general buckets. This project, because of new CEQA, legislation, is required to mitigate against the additional vehicle miles traveled it will induce with the extra capacity. And so that needed to be developed, list of projects and the amount which they could reduce VMT. And within that VMT mitigation plan, so that's a companion document to the draft EIR that's out now. That VMT mitigation plan has assumptions about funding and for how long it will receive funding, but that's only for the capital portion of the project. So of that, of the total project cost to construct it, a portion of that is being set aside for VMT mitigation, and that's what will fund the VMT mitigation plan. But of course, it's a one-time contribution, right? And we don't want to have all of these services and programs initiated and then just die after they run out of funding. So the assumption here is that the toll, the net tolling revenue that is generated by the tolled lanes would be prioritized to continue those programs and services defined in the VMT mitigation plan. It doesn't preclude other, services, but that's the starting point, right? Because in order to mitigate against the VMT, Caltrans from the CEQA perspective really wanted to make sure that they were real projects that existed in somebody's plan somewhere, right? So there are lots of possibilities, right? But we couldn't point to them as real projects because they have to be in a plan, right? That was a criteria for establishing the VMT mitigation plan. So that's how we ended up with that. So you might be wondering, well, why didn't they consider, inter-regional, transit service? Because nobody has that in the plan right now, right? There isn't a plan for inter-regional service by any, single entity that we could point to defend that, in the CEQA document. Doesn't mean that can't occur in the future, and it doesn't mean that the JPA couldn't be, the organization that, ultimately, provides that service. I don't know if they can do that or not, but you understand the point I'm trying to make. So there were constraints within the VMT mitigation plan that we were working with. But moving forward, we're assuming that the toll revenue will continue to fund those programs and services. And then we need to circle back to what's called a traffic and revenue study, which is also accompanies the tolling application, which will outline how much additional net tolling revenue would be available. And then there's all these complicated calculations that need to occur because you have to have your startup costs for the JPA, you have your back office contracting. There's all these costs that, occur. A lot of them are at the startup, and then you've got this Caltrans one-time funding that's gonna start these programs. And then, in the outer years, you start to get into when you're gonna need to be, when you will have excess toll revenues and what it will go towards.
Back when they were.
Yeah, so there's a lot of uncertainty clearly, right? And nobody knows how much toll revenue there's gonna be. We don't even know what the tolls are gonna be yet, right? In terms of what dollar amount they'll be set. Certain assumptions are made for the traffic and revenue study. for the concept of operations that's being submitted to the CTC. But at the end of the day, we don't know. But absolutely CEQA mitigation, you know, the EIR is predicated on VMT mitigation being funded on an ongoing basis by the toll revenue. So we know that those are going to be towards the top of the waterfall, if you will. And that additional revenue above and beyond that could then be used for other sorts of transit service, other sorts of investments, you know, above and beyond what's in the VMT mitigation plan.
But what we discovered through the VMT mitigation plan analysis process was that, hey, great, you know what performs best from a VMT per dollar spent? Transit service and TDM programs. So, you know, you think that, oh, you know, we need to do, you know, we have all these capital projects that the region needs or the corridor could use, you know, even active transportation projects, which would be nice to be able to use some of the funding for, but you just don't get the users and the VMT reduction that you can get by providing resources for people to use alternative transportation.
Brian and I can talk about this a lot more.
Other comments or questions? I do have a couple, such as, super exciting, and also lots, left to go. And I also thank you for a really good report. I appreciate that. Who's gonna serve as CARTA staff? That's my first question.
SACOG,
I'm shocked.
at least on a temporary basis until CARTA makes decisions about, how it wants to staff itself.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And given that the CAC for Yolo Transit has a deep and abiding interest in equity, especially as it rolls out on the corridor, and that a lot of that's moving to CARTA, how does the CAC make sure that it gets heard?
Great question. So, you know, as you saw, while there's just one, for the time that there is only one project, and that project is in Yolo County, you know, 3 of the 5 members of the board are from Yolo County. So Yolo County has the majority vote on that board. Again, and 2 of them, of course, are appointed by our board. So, you know, while we will not be staffing CARTA, we will not be preparing the agendas and packets, et cetera. Clearly, YoloTD staff will have a strong interest in, you know, tracking that process, bringing items to our board for their discussion prior to them coming to CARTA as we're able to do so. And similarly, that commitment then extends to the CAC as well. Now, obviously, since we are not in control of the CARTA agenda, we won't always have a clear sense. But I would just say that, you know, our hope and our expectation is a continued, you know, effective partnership with SACOG, and collaboration on, you know, items that come before the CARTA board.
Thank you.
And Brian's reminding me, part of the funding that has funded all of this work came from a $2 million grant from SACOG that we applied for and won last year. Part of the scope of work for that was the development of an equity program, which will follow all of the steps that we're involved in now. And that, so that equity program will be developed. We still have we are the ones who still control that funding. Ultimately, an equity program is going to have to be adopted by the CARTA board. But that is YoloTD funding, and we are the ones who will be leading that effort. So that is something that we absolutely want to make sure we work with the CAC on.
Quick follow-up. Sure. How much did you say the grant was for?
$2 million.
Any questions? Andrew and then Stephen.
Yeah, I have, so I wanted to, first, and this will lead into a question, just wanted to provide a quick update on, comments that, Davis, the Bicycling Transportation and Street Safety Commission, and then ultimately the city council had, and a few key things that came up. This isn't holistic, but a few of the key transit focused concerns that came up, but when it came to the draft EIR is, the city council's letter expressed, it recommended that the EIR go back and examine impacts of the transit lane alternative 6 with the expanded levels of service. The current EIR only had the current level of bus service, but didn't account for the possibility that even though there wouldn't be VMT mitigation funds in that scenario, that other funds, local transportation fund, for example, could be used to still expand transit service over the causeway between Davis and Sacramento. Also, there was, the need was raised to examine the option of converting an existing lane to a toll lane, since the draft DIR only had the it only had converting an existing lane to a traditional HOV lane, but not converting an existing lane to a toll lane, so that was a recommendation. Also, concerns were raised in the city's letter about the exclusion of the 42, the trunk transit service for our county from the VMT mitigation fund, or from the VMT mitigation plan, I should say. That was something the city went, or the city recommended going back and looking at those costs. And I know from our chat a couple of weeks ago that there are some revised cost numbers coming, so excited to see those. And then one other thing that came up in the BTSSC discussion, this was not mentioned in the city council letter specifically, but the fact that a large section of the proposed transit lane in alternative 6, as well as the connecting structure in West Sacramento in alternative 6B, would not actually carry any existing or proposed transit. This isn't to say, I mean, in the future, maybe there'll be a service between West Sacramento and Natomas, but as of right now, I mean, that land would just be sitting there empty in that alternative, so that was a concern that we had on the BTSSC. So now leading into my question, which is with those concerns in mind, and then also having seen the Air Resources Board's comments, which arguably were much more scathing than the cities in terms of, I mean, in terms of discussing the project's alignment with CEQA and saying and laying out how, I mean, there were different the calculations were made differently in different parts of the EIR, sort of to make things look convenient. And again, these are some of the foremost environmental experts in the state raising these concerns, which, I mean, in my view, is fairly concerning. So again, with that in mind, have there been discussions about, would there be the possibility of discussions with FTA about potentially extending the deadline to obligate the infra grant to address, so that some of these issues could be addressed, or would that be gone for sure if the EIR is not approved by April? And then also along those lines, I was curious what would happen to the grant if the EIR was approved and the funding obligated, but then after that, questions were raised and like if the EIR were thrown out in court, again, what would happen to the infra grant?
So the FHWA does not have discretion to grant an extension. The way the transportation bill under which this grant was given did not grant the agency any discretion in providing any extensions whatsoever. So it would literally take an act of Congress to, and we all know how much Congress is getting done these days, to grant an extension for this project or any other project that was funded under that transportation bill. So not a likely scenario. And believe me, one that we ran to ground many times, over many months. If the EIR is approved and certified by Caltrans, and then the funding is obligated, and then there's a lawsuit, which is, I think, what you're getting at. The filing of a sequel lawsuit would not halt the project from moving forward unless there was an injunction by a judge, which basically said that the project has to stop until these issues are addressed. And so in that scenario, yes, if there was an injunction, then that could, and depending on when exactly that injunction was issued, that could have implications for the ability to obligate the funds to move forward with the construction.
Thank you for that.
Okay. One of the concerns I've had about I-80,
Can I just interrupt for a moment, because we are the CAC to the board and the board has actually taken that direction. I really want to make sure that we're not getting crosswise with our appointing authority on those issues.
okay.
Continue.
One thing I'm concerned about now, as well as in the future, is the speeding on I-80. And that's another source of revenue, I guess, for the CHP. There were a couple highway patrol officers at the farmer's market in Davis a few weeks ago, and I was asking about this. Do they have drones, helicopters that can monitor that activity? And I'd like seeing what we heard from the region sign with the 3 screens for the tolls. And what would it be like to have speeding fines depending on the traffic? What your speed is. When I went to Oakley in the end of December to visit my brother, there was a phenomenal sign at the intersection of 113 and Highway 12. It's a roundabout. And it says reckless speeding, $2,500 minimum. I think that might make an impact on people that we've been out of traffic. One time, driving to Sacramento, there were three accidents between Mesa Boulevard and the beginning of the causeway. I go, this is not good. So I think that's a factor that exists now, and adding the other additional lanes won't slow that down any much. I mean, people need to leave earlier, get to appointments, not be late and make people who are driving safely unsafe by their actions.
Yeah, the tolling agents, tolling authority, and us as, project sponsors and Caltrans as project designers can't control, driver behavior, right? We can set the conditions for what we'd like to see, but compliance is ultimately the driver's responsibility. However, a couple of things that are sort of unique to this project. One is that as opposed to an HOV lane, this would make paying customers out of HOV lane, but what would have otherwise been HOV lane violators, because they would be, paying a toll, within the segment that they're driving. Even if they're weaving in and out, they're still, paying a toll. And then there's also, will be dedicated enforcement, zones where CHP can actually sort of, safely, stop and then enter the lane to improve their enforcement, and there's an enforcement contract that has to be signed between the CHP and the JPA in terms of what they would commit to enforce the conditions on on the toll line, and that could include speeding as well.
Yeah, I mean, what it means is there'll be more CHP on the stretch of freeway, because in part, the tolling authority is relying on CHP to help make sure that there's a deterrence that people pay, are paying. And so we would actually be providing funding to CHP to have additional enforcement on the corridor.
Yeah, that was more succinct way.
Before we ask for any more comments, we'll take comments from the public. Is there anybody online that would like to make a comment on this item?
We do not have comments online.
Anybody in the audience? Seeing none, another go around. Patrick?
Yeah, if we could take it back a few to the governance, I wanted to make sure I was tracking on that. So when I saw different scenarios, I was interpreting that as like, these would be like different models of governance, but your explanation, I think, maybe made a little more sense, but it did lose me at one point. So as it grows, as more of the SACOG counties add these projects, they would continue to gain seats on the Carta board via already elected, or via the SACOG board members that already represent those counties. So there'd be one, so there's always just one at-large SACOG member, but then as projects get added in the region, SACOG gets one additional per county with a active project.
Correct. And for a maximum of, you don't get new representatives with each project that comes online.
Right,
You get a maximum for your county. The other thing that I failed to mention was that even in this first phase, each of those organizations gets an ex officio seat. So they get to participate in the process.
Non-voting.
No, what ex officio?
No,
No?
they're different.
Nobody knows what ex officio is.
Non-voting seat, but, the point there being, in the spirit of regionalism, is allowing everybody to, sort of participate in the development of the tolling ordinance and how this precedent-setting project, ultimately sort of, plays out in the region.
Okay, but then I did, thank you. Then I did get lost again a little bit though, when then I saw that there was like 3 per county. And so how does that, how did we land at 3? How do we arrive at 3 per county?
So, in the case of Yolo County, right, we are appointing YoloTD will appoint two and State Cog will appoint, has appointed one.
I see.
So then for each county that joins, they're gonna get the same deal. So that county, Sacramento County will appoint two members, and then State Cog will appoint one member from Sacramento County. And then so it's three members from each county, two of which are appointed by the local agency, one of which is appointed by State Cog. But State Cog's at large doesn't change, it's just one, and that's the part that doesn't change. Maybe I don't know if I'm answering your question.
I think you're trying to ask why three, right?
Yeah, okay, what I'm getting at is that's going to get very big, very fast. And I understand a few reasons why I would do three, is so like you have these groups come together on the same page, you know, they don't come together like have a stalemate. But then also, so SACOG doesn't necessarily, their appointees don't carry the same weight as the jurisdictions, like those scenarios make sense. But I'd also be concerned with having, 20 people come together to make these decisions. And so I was just curious.
Well, there's a maximum of 14, the way the agreement is written now, so there can never be more than 14. Because there are specific organizations that are allowed to join. The El Dorado County Transportation Commission, Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Solano County Transportation. Sorry,
Sure.
Sacramento County Transportation, and Yolo Transportation District, as well as SACOG and Caltrans. So
And not
that's,
Solana.
that's the.
Not
They're part of MTC.
So there's a maximum of 14, and I think that was part of it, because part of the reason for three is to make sure that you have adequate geographical representation within each of the counties as well. And so if you go more than three, you end up with a scenario where you're talking about where the board is may not function as well as you want it to, although SACOG manages to make it work with a lot more. And if you go with less, then you don't have the geographic representation that you might otherwise want to have on the board.
Right, okay, so just, sorry, one last question then. So it won't always be every county that adds a project gets 3 members.
They only get the member when they get their first project.
Right.
And then if they add more projects, so Sac County would get a representation when they do their I-5 project. But then if they also go and do some pollings on 50 and something, so they're not gonna get more seats for each project. They're only gonna have those 3.
Right, I guess my confusion comes from, like, there's 6 counties involved in SACOG.
But in this case, we're only talking about 4. And that's in part due to the fact that Yuba and Sutter are not expected to have toll lanes in any foreseeable future.
Okay, that's the point of clarification I was missing, thank you.
And before we give it to Owen and Molly.
Yeah, so I guess. I'm sure this has been given thought, and maybe this isn't, but in the spirit of we're the Citizen Advisory Committee, I'm just concerned that these voting members are not gonna represent the needs of transit riders effectively, right? Like it's randomly appointed elected officials. And it seems there's this element of randomness, that makes me feel like that this decision-making does not guarantee representation from transit riders. It does not. It actually could, in fact, be quite the opposite, because these decisions are very political, and there will be major incentives for political folks to reduce and minimize tolls, because they don't want to take the political heat. And so I just feel like there would be a way to better inoculate the system so that it could be empowered to raise more revenue, so it's not just a trickle, and really empower our transit riders to get revenue that we need desperately. So I just feel like this is kind of a
Appreciate your comment. I will just say that YoloTD is the only agency a part of this that actually operates transit service. Placer County, El Dorado, Sacramento, it's not SAC-RT, it's not any of the transit operations. So, in that sense, it won't be random elected officials from any jurisdiction, it'll be those who sit on this board. So to the extent that, you all feel that you have the ability to shape what this board does, but it's in no way to disregard your comments. I'm just simply offering those as, I hear you, and I don't think there's any other tolling agency in the state that has an agency that actually actively runs transit service serving on the board of the tolling authority. I think we will be the first, actually.
I guess it's progress.
Well, I take that back, BTA.
There's
An MTC, right?
There's one more
They don't really
backstop.
operate.
So in your scenario, you're imagining that there'll be political pressure to drive down the cost of using the managed lane. However, the tolling authority, because it's a managed lane, they have minimum performance requirements that they're required. So their tolling rates are gonna have to scale, you know, according to demand so that they can maintain that average 45-mile-an-hour speed over the, you know, peak 1 hour of each, you know, peak within the day. So there's the two peaks, right? So they have to make sure that it's performing the way it should, and that will put pressure to not reduce, because if you reduce the cost and they make it easier, then the lane breaks down, and then you're not in compliance with your managed lane requirements.
So one comment before Olin has his, which is, I think, hearing your comment, the VMT mitigation strategy is really going to be the best access point and the part that it's important for Carter folks to understand. Olin.
And I know it's 8 o'clock almost. So here's my question. When all 4 agencies have, or all 4 counties have toll lanes, and an issue comes up with respect to Yolo County, will all 14 members be part of that discussion?
Sure, I'll take this. Yes.
Does that make sense?
So there was, we didn't get into the weeds on this, and we can if you want.
No,
But yes, the only, the one area where there is some, I think, greater local control is when it comes to net excess revenue, which Brian defined, which was a big area of focus for the SACOG board. So in the case of decisions around net excess revenue, the way the voting structure is organized, the counties in which that net excess revenue is generated would have additional leverage, if you will, in the vote in saying how those funds are being spent.
So there'd be deference.
There would be some amount of deference. There essentially would be a supermajority vote requirement for those counties that are affected. For all other decisions, it would be a simple majority vote.
And that sort of makes sense. It's all got to work together.
Right, because operationally, it has to be seamless. You can't have different rules of different pricing, different hours of operations, different
Exactly.
access in, you know, along the corridor, right? In different locations. So it needs to be seamless for the end user. But this was one area where, you know, it was a sensitive issue and, you know, there's some logic to it. But yeah, so nobody can get steamrolled. The benefit for us is because we're first out of the gate. We don't have any external influence from any of the other counties. But when their projects come online, you know, we'll have, you know, some voting influence on how that funding is spent, contingent with the supermajority voting requirement.
Now, just one quick follow-up.
One more.
Now, with this 14-person scenario, SACOG's only got 1 vote and Caltrans has only got 1 vote, correct?
Well, SACOG is, no, SACOG would have 5 votes.
Right,
Because they're the blue
but they've only
outline.
got 1 at large.
Correct, but even that one
Is
at
that-
large is going to be somebody from some county somewhere, right?
Yeah, so who is that? Did you mention that?
Who they've appointed initially is Patrick Kennedy, who's a Sacramento.
You said that, thank you.
He's also a Yolo. No,
No, there are other appointees from Yolo, Oscar Villegas.
Okay, I'm done. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Great discussion. Let's move on to the item 8. Just for the committee members, and I know already knows, but we'll be talking about how we can take a bite at the equity component through mitigation strategies later on. No, in the future, when the opportunity arises.
Okay.
No, we want to go
After
home
party.
sometime. Shall we go with comments from CAC members? Anybody have items?
Anything?
We'll start at the right. Anybody? No? Andrew?
This is, commission update,
Yep.
commission updates. Okay, so a few updates from our recent, BTSSC and Unitrans Advisory Committee, meetings. one thing that kind of in parallel with the discussion up here, it'll relocate the Woodland Transit Center. Unitrans, they have plans, they're looking at relocating their silo terminal on campus. So in some ways, it's kind of a reverse of what's happening in Woodland, where right now it's in a central location, but they're having issues with both limited capacity as well as like having to get the buses through very busy areas with a lot of people biking, walking and whatnot. So they're looking at relocating the silo terminal a little further away from the campus corridor, again, expand that capacity and reduce those conflicts. But again, there'll be discussion on like making sure the service patterns into that, make sure that those core areas are still well served by transit, even if that's not where the actual transit center is, and that is served by the causeway connection, so it does affect YoloTD. Also, BTSSC last month, we had a good discussion. There's a proposal to build a roundabout on Russell and Arlington in West Davis. There was a great presentation from the consultants on that. That's a very exciting traffic calming project. And then last but not least, City Council tonight actually was discussing first steps towards proceeding with a merger of several commissions that actually would include merging the BTSSC and the UAC due to their similar purviews involving transportation. So that's something I will, again, this will just be an initial discussion to proceed with the work to update the charters for those two commissions, but we'll definitely keep you all updated on that.
Thank you. Molly, do you have a comment? So just, I don't want to steal Autumn's thunder, but I'm gonna take a tiny piece of it. Which is that we have applications for our at-large folks, and we will be meeting in February to start scoping who will set up for interviews, and then we'll be setting up the interviews for that. So super excited. I think there are 5, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's great.
A good number. That's
Great. Would you like me to give my report?
all about you, Grace.
All right. Yes, you did steal my thunder on that, but that's great. No problem. Just want to note a couple other things. We have, in case you missed it, we have restored some additional trips on the 211 and 212 in Woodland. Those are early morning and evening trips that were cut during COVID. It was part of our COA Yolo Go. So those trips have now been restored now that our driver situation has improved. That's great. Also, we'll be at our next board meeting, looking at kind of doing a deep dive into how it's going with Beeline. Just in terms of like just some of the data, particularly for Woodland, where the service is new, looking at where are people going, how is it, how is it rolling out? What are some of the challenges? Also, some of the qualitative feedback that we're receiving, on how it's going, and not just in Woodland, but with the app, the changes in the app that also impact Winters and Nights Landing as well. We're expecting a storm here in the next couple of days, and that's always a thing that we pay attention to. Because it does impact our service as well. And, we also serve as part of the emergency operations center here in Yolo County, in case there are people that need to be evacuated. So we're on alert for that over the next few days. And also along those lines, we had a conversation earlier this week, or maybe it would be last week, about entering a mutual aid agreement with Napa and Solano counties for mutual aid in the case of issues like fires and floods. We do obviously share a very fire-prone border with Napa and Solano counties, as our chair from Winters knows well. And currently, we don't have any agreements in place to provide aid to them or for them to provide aid to us. There's been a number of large fires, so we're looking forward to getting some agreements in place for that. And then lastly, we've been in conversations with the city of West Sacramento and SAC-RT about an MOU that they are looking at that would allow the city's West Sacramento on-demand vehicles to cross over the bridge and go into downtown Sacramento. We have been working with staff on that and expressing some of our concerns about, we currently operate a lot of frequent service that goes across the bridge, and wanting to make sure that as they pilot this effort to look at, what would the impacts be for their microtransit service to go into downtown Sacramento, what would the impacts also be to our ridership and our services. So we're working with them on that. I believe that's going to the council on February 21st. So just wanted to give a heads up that is something that's out there that we are in communication with the city about, and that's my report.
Thank you very much. And are there any comments for the director? Andrew, and then like, Molly?
Yeah, just one quick question on that, and it ties into that West Sacramento VIA discussion. Is also, have there been, so last time we discussed the detours to the fixed routes in downtown Sacramento, and I know one thing that came up was the possibility of some discussions with the city government there. Have there been any further discussion on has there been any further discussion on the detours since then?
Yes, there has, and it's too bad Cassandra left because I know based in part on that, she had done some outreach to identify some new contacts at the city to get a better sense of what's happening with their detours and also some options that as we, with the Woodland Transit Center, we're gonna have to be rerouting our 42s, obviously for that and retiming them. And so we're working with the city of Sacramento, and understanding what is some routing that we could use in downtown Sacramento as we're making those changes to the 42 that would allow us to bypass some of the, street closures that are happening on a regular basis there. So yeah, I think that conversation was very fruitful and very helpful for staff, and they have taken some actions to get in contact with the city of Sacramento to try to address some of that.
Molly?
Yeah, so my comment was, I thought you were maybe gonna bring up something that was saw in your executive director report that was sent by email about the low bus ridership that we've seen over the last couple months. So I kind of thought that would be raised here, but I guess it hasn't been, maybe because it was raised at a previous meeting I missed.
I try not to duplicate what's in the written report.
Okay.
But yes, happy to answer questions about that. Yes,
Yeah.
we have been seeing declining ridership on our fixed route in the last few months compared to last year. And so we've been doing some analysis of what may be causing that. And one of the issues that we've been taking some steps is around the rerouting of the 42, where it now goes down Fifth Street. When we launched that service, Unitrans had less frequent service on the A line and L line. And they have now since brought back more service. So there's more Unitrans service on that corridor. As well, it's a lot of student apartments along that corridor. And we did a big push with Unitrans to let students know last year that they could use our service to get to the MU. We didn't do that kind of a push this year. And we think with all of the turnover that happens in the student apartments, we just probably, a lot of our riders just literally graduated or left. And so one of the things we've been doing with the start of winter quarter is going out and doing some more advertising, putting out signage and making sure we're being more proactive about communicating with the students about the fact that they can ride the Yolo bus for free, that it will get them to campus. And so that's one of the things we're looking at. We also believe that the detours in downtown Sacramento is a big impact as well. And so I talked about some of the actions we're doing there as well. I think the Woodland Transit Center, just tonight, it was closed due to police activity in the area. We know that with our trip starting and ending at the Woodland Transit Center at its current location is a real unpleasant experience for a lot of people. So we think there's a number of factors. We don't have, so those are some of the things that we've been talking about, and the team can chime in if there's others that I've forgotten, but those are some of the pieces we're looking at. And we do think it's primarily correlated to the 42. Although also we've been seeing a surge in ridership on the B line in Woodland, and that may also be reducing ridership on 211 and 212.
Interesting. So in your report online, does it break it down by route? No,
It does not.
yeah, so maybe that's something we could I would suggest maybe something we do discuss next CIC meeting, because I think this is something that would probably would be of interest to us. Something that one of my colleagues at Institute of Transportation Studies mentioned was that there is a nationwide trend for more fare hopping and more fare evasion, and that due to COVID, there's been more of that. And she asked me what kind of counters you have on the buses aside from fares. And I thought that might be another interesting opportunity for discussion amongst our committee.
Yes, so that's actually one of the other factors that we've talked about. We also have a lot of new drivers. Right now, we entirely rely on drivers pressing the button, especially if it's free rides, like things like,
exactly.
And so that may also be a factor. We are, we have now signed a contract to buy APCs and have those installed, which are automatic passenger counters, so that we will have a source of data that is not tied to our drivers having to hit the right button. So yes, and I believe our timeline for having those installed is by April. Is that right? Does anyone else have their heads?
between April and June.
Okay, yeah, great, thank you for this.
Oh,
Nice job on the packet tonight, and always, but, it's really nice to have this, copy and you can follow along and make notes. And good job all the way around. Thank you.
any other comments? Just one last one, can you get a quick update on paratransit and where we are with that? That would be cool.
Courtney, I'm looking at you.
Yeah, so we're still working internally, to kind of how we're gonna present that information, both to you and the board. I will say that during our kind of initial analysis, one of the discussions was talking about aligning this paratransit service to be, redefined within ADA and non-ADA service. Although prior, we were looking at potentially cutting some of the service due to the costs associated with operating, a service area that was originally designated as ADA, but that was prior to, the cuts that we had to our fixed route service. So in essence, our ADA designated service area was larger than the actual coverage of our current fixed route service. And so within our internal staff discussions, we kind of realized that there's a way where we are currently working out not having to cut service, but change the designation so that we are in alignment with providing the federally required ADA trips while still having that ability to cover non-ADA trips when we do have the capacity on our operations side. And so within that, it's just taking us a little bit longer to get the information prepared.
Appreciate that. Really look forward to seeing what will be creative, because at this point, there is a huge mismatch between folks and their doctors and their jobs and their internships, and trying to make sure that, we can have people be able to be as self-sufficient as possible. And with that, I think we're adjourned. Thank you for a great meeting.